13 times shall the traitor king go forth. So it was foretold that at the tail end of the 41st millennium, Abaddon's ultimate blow would land during the 13th Black Crusade. As the culmination of the Despoiler's long war, this conflict would be the greatest and bloodiest ever waged since the Horus Heresy. After 10,000 years of attrition, the time was finally right. The Imperium of Man was as much a carcass as its decrepit master, bending under the weight of millennia of stagnation, corruption, and superstition. The stage was now set for the killing blow, and Ezekiel Abaddon, scion of Horus, war master of chaos, and leader of the Black Legion, would be the one to deal it. The time for games and half measures was over. Abaddon had tested the Imperium's defences long enough. His goal was now nothing short of the complete destruction of Terra itself. But to get to the hallowed throne world and claim the Emperor's head, he would first have to break the bulwark of the Cadian Gate. Standing proudly against the forces of chaos, the fortress world of Cadia had thwarted every horror the Eye of Terror had spewed. Bypassing it, as he had done many times before, was no longer an option. So long as Cadia threatened his rear, Abaddon would not be free to march on Terra. Over the course of his previous Black Crusades, the War Master had broken down the veil between the warp and real space. One cruel act after another had torn the barrier around the Eye of Terror, like threads plucked from a tapestry. Chief among Abaddon's goals had been the destruction of the many blackstone pylons surrounding the Eye, and keeping it from expanding. The only thing keeping the fragile laws of the Materium in place were the surviving pylons on Cadia. One final push was now necessary to complete the chain of disaster, and drown the Imperium in a sea of unreality, from which it would never emerge. The targets were set: a full-scale attack on mighty Cadia and its pylons, the expansion of the Eye of Terror, and the sacking of Holy Terra itself. By now, Abaddon had perfected the art of striking against the realm of the Corpse Emperor. His 13th Black Crusade would see him borrow from all his previous experiences. Years before the actual invasion, Ezekiel called upon his allies among the Wordbearers and Alpha Legion to rile up the dregs of Imperial society throughout Segmentum Obscurus. Dark apostles preached the coming of the gods, spurring fanatical death cults and hordes of mutants into action. Alpha Legion operatives activated long-established sleeper cells, targeting vital infrastructure and points of Imperial authority. These tactics usually preceded a Black Crusade, but their scale was truly unprecedented, overwhelming the agents of the Inquisition. The situation got so desperate that at times, a 400% increase in heretical activity was reported by the Adeptus Arbites. Ezekiel's work was made easier by the fact that the Imperium was but a shadow of its former self. Gone were the golden years of the Great Crusade. By the end of M41, the average Imperial citizen lived in such squalor and misery that too many found armed insurrection an appealing proposition. The ease with which Abaddon turned so many against their emperor was as much a testament to the seduction of chaos as it was to the Imperial indifference to its people. To make matters worse, Abaddon's opening moves came at a time of great galactic turmoil. The Imperium was beset on all sides. Orcs were ravaging the Scarus sector in a great war orchestrated by the Alpha Legion. Necron tomb worlds were awakening at an alarming rate throughout the Imperium. Tyrannid hive fleets devoured all in their paths, bogging down immense amounts of manpower and resources. Even the Tau had become emboldened, launching campaigns of assimilation and expansion. The War Master of Chaos knew this, and sought to exacerbate the situation. Once the Alpha Legion and the Wordbearers had done their work, the second stage of Abaddon's plan was launched. Dozens of space hulks suddenly appeared out of the Eye of Terror, heading for Loyalist planets, notably in the Belisar and the Agrippina systems. Though uncommonly numerous, space hulks were certainly not an anomaly in these blighted parts of space. The hulks were initially assumed to be uninhabited, as was often the case, but their trajectory raised concerns. As such, Imperial High Command ordered them to be boarded, and if necessary destroyed. Imperial Navy and Adeptus Astartes elements were dispatched. Although most hulks turned out to be decoys, many more were proven to be horribly corrupted by chaos. The Imperials successfully destroyed the majority, but in many cases the damage was already done. Many fleet elements sent to intercept them immediately reported cases of plague, wreaking havoc among their crew. The transhuman space marines were better equipped to resist the chaotic contagions, but the mortal servicemen of the Navy fared much worse. Following this crippling blow, Abaddon launched the third stage of his plan. Out of the folds of the eye came the Plague Claw, an infamous vessel of the Nurgle-aligned Death Guard. Wherever the vessel went, pestilence followed. Despite still reeling from its encounter with the Space Hulks, the Imperial Navy, under Admiral Quarren, mobilized to intercept the threat. After a frenetic chase, the Admiral managed to catch the accursed vessel near the Fenerax dust cloud. Launching an all-out assault on the isolated ship, Quarren's elation soon turned to horror. Seemingly out of nowhere, enemy reinforcements arrived in an ambush. A massive Death Guard fleet, led by Typhus, the Herald of Nurgle, fell upon the Loyalists. The Battle of Fenerax, later logged as the first large-scale battle of the 13th Black Crusade, was a disaster for the Imperials. Quarren's fleet suffered heavy losses, with many ships falling into the hands of the traitors. Imperial historians would later note the similarities between the Chaos tactics at Fenerax and the Imperial victories during the Gothic War at Gethsemane, or against the Wolfpacks. No doubt the traitors had studied the tactics of Ravensburg and his men, and were putting them to good use almost 1,000 years later. Nevertheless, Admiral Quarren managed to avert a complete catastrophe. Once the initial shock of the ambush had worn off, he rallied the remnants of his fleet and beat a fighting retreat. Thanks to his men's discipline, the bulk of the fleet was saved from certain doom, though many more died from plague in the following days. After this decisive Imperial defeat, the Chaos Astartes were free to reave across the stars, spreading plague and pestilence as they went. Many sectors, including the Cadian Gate, suffered immensely at no cost to the traitors. The Administratum was hard-pressed to keep up with the ever-increasing casualty list. As resources were redirected for military use and priority upper spire citizens, the masses were left to fend for themselves. Emergency quarantine measures did little besides dooming millions more to die in isolation, as Nurgle's diseases made a mockery of conventional treatments. To make matters worse, dark rumors started circulating. People spoke of plague-ridden corpses rising to gorge themselves on flesh, even as the Arbites sealed away the lower hives. In the face of such apocalyptic loss of life and imperial inefficiency, millions turned to religious fanaticism. The so-called Curse of Unbelief, or Zombie Plague, was seen as divine punishment for the sins of humanity. Insane cult leaders launched their rabid flocks against anyone suspected of impious acts against the Emperor, further worsening the situation. Despite Herculean efforts from Imperial authorities to squash the zombie rumors, the truth soon became undeniable. The hive world of Subiaco Diablo saw the largest rise of plague zombies so far in the war. Millions of corpses rose from their mass graves and shambled towards their former hive cities, devouring all as they went. Despite heroic resistance from Cadian regiments and the sororitas of the Order of the Ermine Mantle, the world was all but consumed by the dead. Soon, similar scenes played out across the sector, driving the masses into further bouts of hysteria. All around the Eye of Terror, the dead devoured the living, zealots clashed with heretics, and in the middle of the slaughter stood trillions of helpless citizens, doomed to die. Abaddon's opening strike was a resounding success. Without having committed the bulk of his forces, he had done immeasurable damage to his enemy. Imperial authority, either political or religious, was at an all-time low. Neither the Arbites nor the Ministorum, nor even the Inquisition, could impose order. Every branch of the Imperium launched massive efforts to try to rein in the citizenry, but with little success. In some cases, even high-ranking members of the ecclesiarchy, desperately preaching for calm, were dragged down from their pulpits by the angry mob and torn to pieces. Others sided with the fanatical mobs, either to save their lives or through earnest conviction that only through righteous violence could their worlds be saved. The mobs spared no symbol of imperial authority. Much to Abaddon's delight, the enraged population soon directed their anger against Imperial Navy or Militarum bases, compromising Imperial logistics and leading to bloody retaliations and mass shootings. Amidst this chaos, more organized cells of saboteurs saw their opportunity to strike. Often assisted by embedded elements of the Alpha Legion, highly trained operatives infiltrated naval bases, churches, governmental offices, and other high-value targets. Many high-profile assassinations soon followed. Even the famously stoic Cadians fell victim to the madness. Though far fewer incidents were reported on the Fortress world, worrying signs of corruption began to appear. In one infamous incident, Lord Commissar Salin took control of an elite Kassakan regiment and arrested prominent and celebrated officers of the 92nd Cadian Regiment. All of them were accused of treachery and executed on the spot, with no evidence brought to substantiate the charges. Whether the accusations were true or the commissar fell to a bout of chaos-induced madness is unclear, but either way, the situation was dire and morale was low. One of the most dangerous seditious movements came out of the world of Lelithar. A mysterious but supremely charismatic demagogue emerged, calling himself the Voice of the Emperor. Claiming to be the only one to truly represent the master of mankind, he decried Imperial leaders as impious and sinful. His masterful orations drove many to great acts of violence against their masters. Almost half of the PDF of the planet sided with the madman, and many spread out into neighbouring worlds to spread his message. The defection of thousands of able-bodied troops alerted the Cadian High Command, which decided to take drastic action. Before they could muster a response, however, a miracle occurred. Despite the Voice's early successes, a great resurgence of canonical faith occurred within a few days on Lelithar. The vast majority of Imperial citizenry, often meek and tractable, rose as one against the heresies of the Voice and his followers, killing most of them. This unforeseen popular uprising saw Imperial authority restored with shocking speed. Indeed, the Adeptus Administratum and Ministorum would even note that the experience had reinforced the spirits of the local populace, who were now more ready than ever to face the archenemy. As for the Voice, inquisitorial elements hunted him down mercilessly, but to no avail. A lone Vindicare assassin was the only one to get close enough for a vague description. He reported the Voice was strikingly fast, even for his heightened senses. Taller and broader than any mortal man, he hid his features under a white cowl and slaughtered his pursuers with a brace of pistols before making his escape. Meanwhile, Abaddon pressed his advantage, dealing as much damage as possible before the arrival of his main fleet. The Night Lords, for instance, were instrumental in further eroding Imperial faith and sowing doubts in the hearts of the faithful. They took a particular delight in striking during religious festivals and turning hope into despair. On Phonosar Prime, their attack came during a period of fasting and prayer. The traitorous Eighth destroyed all power sources in the world's capital, plunging it into complete darkness. They then indulged in a twisted game of cat and mouse, killing thousands as their victims called on the Emperor for aid. Scenes like these played out across the various sectors of Segmentum Obscurus, with precious few loyalist successes. The Inquisition was hard-pressed to maintain morale amongst the loyalists, and each victory was played up to the fullest. The Battle of Xerxia and the Ormanip raid were two such examples. On Xerxia, the Sisters of Battle of the Order of the Wounded Heart proved their mettle when they slaughtered a Chaos cult led by a band of Chaos Astartes. Reminding the galaxy of their faith and zeal, the Sororitas cut down their mortal and transhuman enemies to a man, earning them sector-wide praise and recognition. The Ormanip raid, however, was far more problematic for Imperial propagandists. The Black Legion dispatched many Astartes to attack the Ormanip listening station and slaughter its astropathic choir. While the traitors made short work of the bulk of the garrison, an elite Cadian Kassakin detachment resisted heroically. It was a testament to their world and their training that these unaugmented mortals managed to hold back the traitors for several standard Terran hours. When all seemed lost for the Cadians, blood-chilling howls pierced the night. The Black Legion stopped dead in its tracks, and one by one, the traitor Astartes were dragged and butchered by an unseen enemy that struck from the shadows. It was almost unheard of for Space Marines to panic, but the survivors of the skirmish reported how disorganized and ineffective the traitors' response was to this new aggressor. In a few minutes, the killing was done, and the Black Legionnaires lay mangled and broken on the ground, as if savaged by a beast out of ancient Terran legend. Though the details of the battle were kept from the public, the Inquisition would later determine that the legendary 13th Great Company of the Space Wolves likely saved Ormanip. Lost since the Horus Heresy, these sons of Rus had all mutated into ferocious wolfen. Now more beast than man, they remembered their loyalty to the Emperor and had finally returned to pay the traitors back in blood. These opening moves played out for years, until the final year of the 41st millennium. On this auspicious date, Cadian Command finally decided to call upon the wider Imperium for aid. The situation was no longer tenable, and the many other Imperial fronts would need to be neglected in order to defend the Cadian Gate. millions of troops were rerouted from dozens of campaigns and crusades and redirected towards the Eye of Terror. The time had come for the Imperium to present its full might against the traitors. So great was the muster that hundreds of worlds were required to quarter the men and equipment. Cadia was chief among them. It was decided that the bulk of its reinforcements would be gathered at the venerated Tyrok Fields, one of the planet's rare open spaces. The force of arms gathered there mirrored the hallowed days of the Great Crusade. As Cadian fathers upheld tradition and forced their children to stare directly at the Eye of Terror in defiance, millions of veterans came home. Every single living Cadian generation was called upon to take up a 10,000-year-old burden, hold the line at any cost. But Cadia would not stand alone. Reinforcements came from the width and breadth of the Imperium. Mordians, Vestroyans, Elysians, Kriegers, and every manner of warrior, from feral worlders to the Emperor's Angels of Death, answered the call. Among the many Cadian generals who returned home was a certain Ursarkar E. Creed. Though as of yet relatively unknown, Creed had been made general at the very young age of 40. His name would soon join the likes of the legendary Ravensburg. As far as anyone could tell, the muster at the Tyrok Fields was the advent of a glorious Imperial resurgence, the moment when they would finally strike back against the Plague fleets and whatever else Abaddon had in store for them. Yet at this moment of highest elation, tragedy struck. Thousands of members of the Volskani Cataphracts, either through fear of chaos or loyalty to it, revealed themselves as traitors. Striking without warning against the throng at Tyrok, they took their erstwhile comrades by surprise. Thousands of loyalist guardsmen were killed in the attack, but the Volskani could never hope to slay them all. Instead, they killed their way towards the Leviathan command center of Governor Marius Perelska, aiming to decapitate Cadian leadership. To everyone's horror, they succeeded. The Leviathan was breached, and the majority of Cadia's high command was slaughtered, though they sold their lives dearly. Governor Perelska, a true Cadian, fell with his blade in hand, surrounded by dead traitors. The first loyalist general to respond to this disaster was General Creed. Rallying the 8th Cadian Regiment, he and his standard-bearer, Jaron Keel, led a counterattack. Fighting their way through the Volskani, they made their way to the Leviathan. After fierce fighting, they retook the vehicle and secured the body of the governor before it could be desecrated. After this daring action, Ursarkar Creed addressed the despondent Imperials at Tyrok, the body of Governor Perelska wrapped in a Cadian flag. He swore vengeance on the cowards who had mired this glorious moment, and honoured the venerated dead. So powerful were his words and presence that the Cadian forces hailed him as their new leader. Eyewitnesses claim that Creed refused the crowd 3 times, before finally accepting the heavy burden of command. The Battle of the Tyrok Fields had aimed to break the spirit of the faithful, to crush their morale before the war had truly started. Instead, it had achieved the opposite. As one, the Cadian shock troops raised their lasguns in the air and swore to defend their homeworld to the bitter end. Under the leadership of their new commander, they would show themselves worthy of their fathers. They would crush any traitor and any demon the War Master would send against them. They would put the fear of the God Emperor in the heart of the heretics, and remind the Neverborn why they called him anathema. No matter the cost, no matter the horror, no matter what tomorrow would bring, Cadia would stand. The tides will continue to turn on Abaddon in our next episode, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we will catch you on the next one.